All right, go ahead.
Okay. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Hopefully today will be a little less chaotic on my end. My wife and teenage son are not home on a snow day, and so far the myriad zoo of animals that we have here have been fairly contained. So hopefully I won't have to stop and move the birds or get in the middle of a fight between the older cat and the new kitten again. So we are going to go ahead and start. We're going to talk about entities, locations. Let me get this minimized here. Entities, locations, and relationships. Well, are also one of the other topics in here that we'll talk about is the contacts and the public side login if your LWIA chooses to have your training providers use that. So today is January 7th, 2025, and let's get started. Acronyms being used in this presentation. We have DCEO, Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, OET, which is the DCEO, Office of Employment and Training, IWDS, or as some of you call it, IWDS, Illinois Workforce Development System, LWIA, or LWIA, Local Workforce Innovation Area. LSA is short for Local System Administrator, referring to an IWDS Local System Administrator. And FEIN is the Federal Employer Identification Number. And for those of you who need it, the PowerPoint has been provided in the chat. And if you want to print it off so you can take notes on it as you go, that is fine. I do request that because of the way that we are doing the presentation and presenting information, that you do not work ahead. Don't try to go ahead in the packet or not pay attention to what we're on, because this is one of the things that's a little bit more specialized. Not all of the local system administrators do relationships and entity management and locations. So we find that in a lot of cases this training is usually more for the specialized or focused local system administrators that work with that. So when talking about entity infrastructure, there's usually one entity with multiple locations, and then those multiple locations can have multiple relationships. And as things move on, this will become more clear as we go from screen to screen. What is an entity in IWDS? An entity is a business or organization unit, each with its own unique FEIN. FEIN stands for Federal Employer Identification Number and is a unique 9-digit number issued by the IRS to business entities operating in the United States for purpose of identification. 2 or more entities can all have the same business name, but they will have different FEINs. Every unique FEIN should have its own separate entity record in IWDS. The example that I use is that most Walgreens or McDonald's have individual FEINs for each physical business building or for each franchisee. So like with McDonald's, you may have one franchisee that owns 3 of the McDonald's in your city, and there's another franchisee that owns the other 5. So each individual McDonald's might have its own FEIN, or they might be set up where the franchisee is using their FEIN for the corporate over, and then each of those would be locations under it using the same FEIN. So that's one of the things that you will need to find out when setting up an entity or location in IWDS. You need to ask for the FEIN number. A location in IWDS is a physical, geographical, brick and mortar address from which an entity provides goods and or services to the public. An entity may have multiple locations, as we just explained with McDonald's, that are all using the same FEIN number. And a relationship is entered into IWDS for a location to become a service provider for an LWIA. One relationship can cover multiple titles, 1A, 1D, 1Y, trade, etc., and multiple services can be available within those titles. A location can have multiple relationships with the same LWIA and or with multiple LWIAs. The relationship number is a unique identifier that is selected by the local system administrator when they create the relationship in IWDS. This is not system generated. This is something that you choose your naming, oh good Lord, I lost the word I'm thinking of, configuration that you want to use for your relationships at the LWIA. It could be that you want to do it where you're using the year first and then the description and then something else, or you might do something where you put the business name first and then you put the date. It's whatever makes sense to you for keeping the relationships understandable, that when you see the relationship come up on the drop down or the pick screen, that you know which one's which. The user roles that are needed in IWDS when you're setting up the permissions on the user ID, you have to have the entity maintenance role, the entity maintenance assigned training function included role, and the LWA relationship manager role in order to do these different functions. So you could have someone that is able to do only part of these, or you could choose to give them all of it. So we are going to break this training down into 4 parts. We're going to talk about creating an entity. We're going to talk about adding a location to that entity. Then we're going to talk about adding a contact to that location. And then we're going to talk about adding a relationship to that location with your LWIA. Creating an entity in IWDS. Before entering the entity in IWDS, you need to search for the company from the staff menu page. So you will click on Search Entity under the Entity Information portion of the IWDS main menu. When the screen comes up, there are 4 ways to search for an entity. You can search by the entity name. You can search by the FEIN. You can search by the Social Security number if the business is using the owner's Social Security number instead of an FEIN. That's usually the case when you've got something that's a sole proprietorship, or I think there's a couple other forms of business setups that may use the social instead of creating an FEIN. But I think for the most part, most of you are going to be dealing with people that use FEIN. The other choice is to search by agency type and you'll choose the type from the drop-down menu that is off to the right. In my opinion, an FEIN search is the easiest way to narrow your search to one quick result, as it is a unique identifier, because no 2 entities in IWDS are going to have the same FEIN. When searching by the entity name, it is suggested to use a partial name search if you don't have an FEIN. Or, honestly, if you're looking for something and you know you have multiple locations, but you don't know which one's the right FEIN, such as a Walgreens or a McDonald's, you can search by name and then you can sort it down from there just as easily. But once again, we're talking about the same thing that we mentioned in yesterday's training, where with the searches in IWDS, I always say less is more. The less letters you use, the more results you're going to get, because it's going to look for anything after your last letter, and that's it. So in this case, TI is going to return Tim, time, tire, Timberline. but looking for the word timely is only going to return anything that starts with those first 6 letters, T-I-M-E-L-Y. So timely or timelies or timely watch company are going to be the only results when you put in that many letters. In this case, we are going to do those 6 letters, T-I-M-E-L-Y. This is a fictional company that I created for this training. And when no match is found at this point in time, we're treating it like it's a brand new entity. So we have this timely watch company, and we're trying to enter them for a service provider in our OWIA, and they are not here. So we find no results, and so we are going to add the entity. We're going to click Add Entity at this time. And at that point, we get the Add Entity screen, and anything starred with a red asterisk is required. The rest of the items, that is your choice as an OWIA if you want to fill out those additional pieces of information. Sometimes there are some OWIAs that really like having the website URL recorded on the entity. There are some that when you know that you have an entity name and they have a DBA, doing business as name, so it might be that it is the Robinson's Food Company doing business as McDonald's, because it's a franchisee that set themselves up as a corporation, and then they've got the individual McDonald's under them. So they are doing business as McDonald's, but the entity name actually is Robinson Food Company. So like I said, depending on how this is, there are some of these that some of you will really like recording information in, and some of you just do the bare minimum with the red asterisks, and that's completely fine. Office of Employment and Training recommends to enter as much information as you can, as it may help other IWDS users to be able to differentiate between entities that have the same business names. Because even though you're entering this entity for your LWIA, it's going to be available for all LWIAs to potentially make a relationship with that entity location for training providers. So kind of be considerate of each other when you're making these. I would put everything that you feel is pertinent to that entity record into it when you're creating it. So we are doing the timely business company. I made up an FEIN number that is associated with this company. This agency type is a business, and I am definitely adding it to my favorites in my menu screen for me as a IWDS user. Any additional information is, like I said, your choice whether you want to add it or not. So we're going to click Next to save the entity, and then IWDS will automatically take you to the Add Location screen. Are there any questions about entities at this point? All right. I figured most of you probably are pretty up to date on how this is going, so I just wanted to make sure we didn't have anyone who is new to this that had any questions. We're going to move on to the locations. Creating a location in IWDS is actually almost as simple as creating the entity. At the very top, after you've saved the entity, you get a yellow box that says the record has been added. That means the entity has been saved. It automatically redirects you to the add location, because every entity in IWDS needs to have a location, a physical, geographical, brick and mortar location that they are doing business from. So at this point, once again, the red asterisk items are the required ones. And then you'll want to pick your business functions and your human services so that you know what types of services you're going to be able to choose from for what they can offer. I do recommend that the location accessible to persons with disabilities question, that's becoming more and more important as we go forward. I I'm surprised it hasn't been made required before now. Now, once again, you need to have at least one location entered where the entity is doing business. However, you may end up entering more than one location if you choose. So the location information includes the location name, which can be completely different from the entity name. An example that those who are in central Illinois will understand, especially the ones who are more toward the Quincy area side of things, is that Neiman Foods is the name of the entity, the corporation, and they have physical locations for grocery stores that include names like County Market, Harvest Market. At one point in time, it was Cub Foods. I know at one point in time when I was in college over that direction, there was a Neiman Foods grocery store by that exact name. So you can have multiple businesses that have different names under the one location name of the corporation. Another example for those of you who are up north, Jewel Food Stores. At one point in time, Jewel was its own company, but sometime in the early 2000s, they were bought up by Albertsons. So Albertsons is the overall corporation that's over the top of it. And Albertsons has the Albertsons stores. They had Save-On at one point. They have Osco Drug. They have Jewel Food Stores. And I think they have 3 or 4 others as well. So you could have a completely different name for the location than what you actually have for the entity. So once you get your location name added, then you're going to add the actual geographical address where they're doing business. You're going to add the city and the state as part of that, as long as with the zip code. If you want to add the +4, that is optional. You need to list the county where that is. Then you need to list the phone number for that location. Then down at the bottom here, we talk about whether or not it's got ADA accessibility, and then the types of business functions and human services that will be provided at this location. The local system administrator needs to select those business functions for those varying types of services that will be offered to the LWS. So we are going to want to click on the select/view human services for the provider management screen to look at those additional choices. So at this point, I've got the Timely Business Company. I'm listing them at 500 East Monroe Street, which is the old address for DCEO 2 years ago, where it's in Sangamon County. That's my old office number that's long gone. And then, yes, the location is accessible to people with disabilities. They're going to be offering career services, job placement, training services, OJT and work experience, as well as youth. And now we're going to take a look at the human services and see if there's any of those that they're going to be offering. So at that point, and I've got it broken down this way because it is a long screen. Each one of these just keeps going. It just goes all the way down until you get to the bottom. But that's not going to fit on a PowerPoint show. So this is how I decided to place it on the screen so that you guys can have it for one quick reference sheet. This is all the services of that type that can possibly be picked under human services. At this point, you're going to select all the ones that you want to apply to this location and then click the View List button. So at that point, we are choosing business development, child care resource and referral, daycare services, clothing and grooming, household goods, thrift shops, and then we've got the youth development down here that looks like my X is missing. And then you click View List. These are the ones that we picked, and then we click View List. And then this is the list that is created by IWDS on the next screen. It focuses in so you don't have that whole big mess that you're going to be looking at. You're just looking at the items that you selected. After looking at the screen, if you decide you need to add or remove items from this list, you click Edit List, and you go back to this, and you either check or uncheck the items that you want to have in your ultimate list. When you get to this point and you review this and you're happy with what's here, you click Accept List. At which point, down here at Human Services, it starts listing them in order, and then it says more if there's more than just what will fit on that little line. Pardon me while I cough for a second. I apologize. All right. So we are looking this over. We want to make sure that all of this information is entered the way that we like it. At which point, if we're happy with everything, we're going to click the next button, and it takes us to the Add Contact screen. Are there any questions about adding a location at this point? All right, we are going to move to the next section. Creating a contact at that location. Now, the informational message at the top of the IWDS screen is going to state the record has been added. That shows you that the location has been saved. It automatically redirects you to this list contact screen because we want you to enter at least one contact person for that location. The entity should identify if their location contacts to the LWIA local system administrator, including who the contact is that will be entering the training programs for the location, if that is what you want them to do. I know some of the LWIAs prefer to enter their own training programs and not have the public go in on the public side of IWDS and enter them. That will be part of this presentation. We're still going to show you how to do it if it's something that you want to either continue to do, or if it's something that you're thinking that, well, you know what, maybe it's time to have them start entering their own. So we're going to cover that anyway, but once again, it's your choice as an LWIA whether you want them to enter them for you or whether you want to be the one who is entering all the information. Kirsten, if you can mute everyone except me, that would be wonderful. All right, so once the entity has identified their contacts to you, they need to be entered into the system. To add a contact, the Add Contact button, pretty simple, and it will take you to the Search Contact screen. And the reason it takes you to the Search Contact screen is because these contacts may already be out here from previous companies or from a previous location that has already been entered. So you may be looking to add someone as a contact for your location who's already in here, and that makes your job easier because then you just have to pick them. If they don't show up from the search, then you're going to have to enter them. Now, I will note, IWDS does not require a contact for the location. However, if there's no contact information entered or recorded for this location, then the local system administrators for the LWIA are considered to be responsible for entering any training programs for that location in order for them to be usable in IWDS. So you can skip this step by clicking return. I strongly do not recommend that. I recommend having a contact person at every physical location so that if you need to pick up a phone and call them, if there's a problem, if anything comes up, it could be something as simple as, did you close, or are you open today? Are you still offering this service? Or following up on whether or not one of your clients actually showed up for one of the things they were supposed to go to. It's nice to have that contact on the location. So the search contact screen, we're searching for a contact with Timely Business Company, and we're gonna enter the information in any of these fields and click search to try to narrow down the results. If you want to search by entity name, you can. If you want to search by the person's first name, partial first name, partial last name, if you want to search by just the last name, if they gave you an email address, any of these things can be used in any combination to try to narrow down your results. So if the contact you're looking for has already been entered in IWDS and you find them with this search, you can add them to the new location, which we will show you how momentarily. So in this case, since this entity and location were just created and no one from Timely Business Company has ever been in here before, it's very likely that the contact won't be in IWDS and we're going to have to add them. So we're just going to go ahead and click Add Contact in this case. And we're adding Jane Jetson, who is the CEO of Timely Business Company. And fields marked with the red asterisk are the required fields in order to save the record. Because she is we have to ask whether she is the primary contact for this location. And that is for this location, not the overall entity. So that's a key point that when they're giving you the contact information, you need to ask, are they the primary contact for this location? Because you can enter multiple contacts for a location. Matter of fact, one of our locations in IWDS that a lot of you will be familiar with is Lincoln Land Community College. I think one of the locations on there has 22 contacts added and 14 of them are currently active and only one of them is listed as the primary. So depending on how big this location is and how important it is to you in all these relationships and business agreements that you do with them, you can have dozens of contacts added as needed. But in this case, so we've got Jane Jetson, she's the CEO, we got her email, which is not required, which I wanted to go ahead and put in anyway, because it's just the way I like to do things. I like having her title because it helps me to understand who this contact is in relationship when we have multiple people in there as the contacts. We add the address, we add the county. I like having the phone number because I like being able to contact them. Once again, email and phone just makes it easier. If you put it in there, it's easier on you. And then you have to ask about whether you have to decide if they're active or not, because if they leave and they've been replaced by someone else and you find that out, then you go in and you can say they're not active. But we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. So then down here at the bottom, the question is, are they a human service provider or an ITA training provider? And you have to choose, you have to make sure you mark those for whatever it is that their location is offering. At this point, I can either hit save and return and save just the one contact, or I can hit save and add another to add a second contact to this location. In this case, I saved and returned because I only have the one. So the informational record message at the top says this record has been added. That tells you the contact has been saved, and she now appears under my list contacts. Jane Jetson, here's the information, the phone number because I entered it. Her status is active, and she is the primary contact for this location. Now, this person, because they have been saved as an IWDS username, login ID has been created for her for the public side login, if that is the way that your OWIA chooses to do things. In order to see that information, the user ID, you have to click the view and go into the contact record. We're going to do that now. At the very bottom of the screen, a username has now been created, and it will not let them log in on the red, white, and blue screen that is the main IWDS screen. They have a different login screen, which we will show here in just a minute. So now the username has been generated, but we don't have a password for them at this point because we haven't done anything here. But this reset password button is going to become very important in a second. Now, if your contact is entering training programs in IWDS for the OWIA to approve or deny, that's the login, the public side login that they will be using. So we're going to go ahead and click, and we're going to get into this a little more. So there's that reset password button, just blowing it up so everybody can definitely see and tell where this is. And to reset the password, we click it, and then up at the top in the yellow, there's an informational message that gives the user password, and it is a temporary one that is generated by IWDS. It does not expire, but the next time the user logs in, they're going to be forced to pick their own password when they log in. You can either use copy-paste, where you highlight and copy-paste, or you can use a screenshot to capture this information and send it to the user via email. But keep in mind that if you're doing the copy-paste, the password's up here, and the username's down at the bottom. So you're going to have to do 2 screen captures or 2 copy-paste in order to get them their username and their password that you just generated. At any point in time that they're having issues logging in, if they forgot their password, need a password reset, this is where you go. You go into the record, you view the contact, you click reset password, it will give you a new temporary password, and that is what you send them if you have to do that. Now, the location contact is going to need that username, that password, and this URL for the public side login in order to enter training program information for their location in your OWIA. Now, this login URL here is slightly different than the main login page that you're used to. It is orange and blue instead of red and blue. And the way that we kind of jokingly refer to it around the office is it's Illini colors. University of Illinois, go Illini. So just tell them that if they're not on the orange and blue page, they're on the wrong one. Orange and blue is for the training providers. Red and blue is for your career planners. Now, back to entering contacts. If you need to add more contacts to the location at this point, you can always click the Add Contact button and add an additional contact. As we said earlier, you can add as many contacts as you want to a location. When you have finished adding contacts, you can click on the link for List Relationships in the blue navigation panel on the left, and that will take you to the point where you're going to be entering relationships. You're able to view the relationships the entity and location already has set up, or in this case, since it's brand new, you're going to be entering the new relationships for the location. Are there any questions about entering contacts, about getting the user ID and password for the public side, or questions about the public side IWDS login page? All right, I see something popped up in the chat. Can you have more than one primary contact for a service provider? I think you can. I haven't looked at that in a little while. I will take a quick peek here. Let me do one thing. I'm going to go off of there. I'll be right back. I'm going to log into the test environment, take a quick peek at that entity. So we're going to take you guys with me here. We're going to go in and I'm going to take a quick peek at that entity and location and get to the contacts. Waiting for the little spinning dial to catch up with me here. Well, I'm guessing there's something, there it goes. I know the programmers are adding some additional items that we are going to be testing later today and tomorrow. So they could have been doing a deployment, I guess not happening. Here we go. So just live data here, we're going to do like we just did a second ago. So I'm going to search like I'm searching for the Timely Business Company. And I go here. And here's all the different things that I have set up in the test environment. I have two different entities of the Timely Business Company. For those of you with really good memories, you'll remember that I had the double digits going. I had 771133,500 for that particular one for this. So then we get here and we see all that. And I hit list locations. We have two locations where the Timely Business Company is operating in this test environment that I set up. I click here to get to this one. I'm going to list the contacts. We have Jane Jetson. I'm going to quickly go ahead and add a second contact to see if we can make them the primary. So if we have a different contact that's over at the other location, and I don't want that person, I'm going to add, see here, for those of you who are cartoon fans, since we have the Jetsons going on, I'm going to add Spacely Sprocket, and we're going to make him the CFO, and give him s.sprocket at ebc.org. And then we're going to go down here and just make up a phone number for him. And we're going to give him his own little extension because he's a CFO. And let's see what happens when we make him the primary. Nope, it says Timely already has a primary, so apparently one is the limit. We're going to go ahead and do this, and now you can see we have two people here. Now, if Jane had left the company and we wanted to make Spacely the primary, you would go into Jane, make her active no, or we would make her primary no, and then you'd go into Spacely and update him to make him the primary. So I hope that that was unplanned, but I think it was worth doing. I think everybody will get something good out of that one. Let's go back here. And let's go back to the screen share. And I'm going to get back into the PowerPoint. Show this. Figure out how to close. There we go. Close that. Got it. So I'm going to go back here to the chat, and there we go. Well, thank you, Joanne. I actually think that worked out rather nicely for the presentation. I think that's something that in this recording will be very beneficial to people who want to see how that works in real time and with real data. I do have to point out, since it's being recorded, that all of that business information, all the contacts that I have in my things are fictional people, fictional locations, things that I made up from my imagination. There is nothing that is live or real data. Okay, we're going to move on. Now we are creating a relationship in IWDS. So we click that left rail bar that we talked about over here. After we were done adding contacts, we click this list relationships, and it takes us right over here to list relationships. Newly created entities and locations are not going to have any existing relationships between them and the LWIAs. So if this is a brand new location or a brand new entity that you're just added locations to, don't expect to see anything. The LWIA local system administrators are only going to be able to see relationships between the location and their own LWIA. So if you are in LWIA 3 and you're looking up a location that is in LWIA 1, you're not going to see relationships between that location and LWIA 1 in your dropdown when you log in here. You're only going to see any that you've created in LWIA 3 with that location. You click Add Relationship, and it's going to take you to it's going to start that by taking you to the Search Location screen to begin adding the new relationship. From here, we're going to search for the location that you want to set the relationship up in your LWIA with. If you have multiple locations for the same entity providing service to your LWIA, you're going to need to make multiple relationships. A relationship is between one location and the LWIA. So each location is going to need to have their own relationship set up with the LWIA as service providers. A partial name can be used to search for the entity name. You can also use any of this other information here to search for these locations. I know that there's at least one LWIA that prefers to search for their locations by looking for the types of business functions or human services being provided. I think in some cases that could create a pretty lengthy list. You can do a combination of things where you do the partial name as well as the business functions. That may help. But I know each one of you guys gets into your own groove and finds the way that you prefer to do it. There's no wrong way. It's just the way that makes the best sense for you. Next, at this point, we did timely, and we found 3 locations that came up stating that they are doing business as Timely Business Company as the location name. So we've got 500 East Monroe, 1440 West Wabash, and 1 West Old State Capitol. If the location you're looking for isn't here, you need to click Return and go back and try again. However, in this case, we are actually going to take a look at the newest location on here, which is the current address of DCEO. 1 West Old State Capitol Complex is the one that we're going to create a relationship with this time. So you click pick, and it takes you to the provider management update basic information screen. First step in creating the relationship is the provider management update basic information screen, as you see here. I know that we're switching to the other FEIN number at this point. The reason that I updated these screens and put a new location in here is that over the years, as I've done these training webinars and PowerPoints, we've actually ended up with a number of relationships that I've created or contacts that I've put in or other things that were under those other locations. I wanted to get clean screenshots for this new PowerPoint where we were doing everything from scratch as I was building it from the ground up. So at this point, we're shifting gears. So I'm just going to ask you to kind of come along with me and not get caught up that it's not the same FEIN or the same location we've been talking about up to here. These are new screens so that we can get some fresh data. When you're creating the relationship number, it should be a unique identifier using alphanumeric characters. Whatever naming convention, that's the word, convention, whatever naming convention you prefer to use when creating your relationships, whatever makes sense to you, whatever you can look at and understand what it is, and that's the relationship, what you should use to name your relationships. In this case, I'm going date-based, and I'm using today's date and then a 00 at the end, because the next one, if I do make a second relationship with this particular location on this same date, or if I make a second relationship on this same date, I can always use 01 or 02 or whatever. Or if I go in and I make another one tomorrow, I can use 01, 08, 2025. Then you have to choose your relationship type from the drop-down menu. It has to be either contract, other, referral, or vendor. Those are the two required fields up at the top. You can put things here in the notes to help you, things for reference, things that may make sense to you or to the next person who comes after you in your position. Next, you're going to scroll down into the provider management update basic information page to find the fund source grant information screen. So this is a blow up of what we're going to enter. You have to put in the fund source, you have to put the start date, you have to put the end date, and it is strongly, strongly, strongly recommended that you just ignore the contract amount. That may have been used prior to my joining the DCEO OET team in 2010, but for my purposes and from my own training when I started in 2010, that has no longer been used. Some people still put things in there, and then when there are problems or issues sometimes with making things work with the relationship or the services, if I go in and I'm looking at these screens and I find a dollar amount in there, I remove it. And then suddenly, magically, the problem goes away. So like I said, it's not a required field. Entering a dollar amount here could trigger other programming edits in IWDS that can cause future issues for you down the road. When you're entering your fund source, the start date can be in the past, it can be the present date, or it can be in the future. The date range entered for the fund source affects what services are available with this provider on the dates before, during, and after the date range. So in this case, start date of 1/1/25 for both 1A and 1B services with this location means that if you're entering a service with a date of 12/31/2024 or earlier, this provider is not going to show up as a choice. The date of the service has to be between the start and the end date in the relationship in order for this location to be available as a choice. Once you save this record, the start date cannot be changed, not even by the IWDS system administrators, which are me and Chris Tylen and Jim Box. The start date can't be changed. What can happen, and we'll show you in a little bit, if you make a mistake, I can show you how to deal with it. The reason that the start date cannot be changed, I don't know. I believe that it's because it was designed, from my conversations with the programmers over the years, they didn't want a situation where this was an active relationship, it's been out there for a long time, and then suddenly somebody went in and changed the date, and we've got hundreds of orphaned service records now that shouldn't have been able to be entered according to the logic. So this may have been, let's say that this was an older one, and it was from 1/1 of 2020, and it ended on 6/30 of 2022. If somebody went in and tried to change that start date from 1/1 of 2020 to 1/1 of 2023, then any and all services that had been entered prior to that, once the date was changed, would now suddenly be orphaned records and be creating a logic bomb, essentially, inside IWDS, because those services would no longer technically have been allowed. So that's the reason why that even for the system administrators, this is a field that is critical. It's a critical starting point that once you have saved this record, that's not going to be allowed to be changed. But like I said, I do have a way that I can explain to you on how to fix it if you've made a mistake and you catch it. We'll get to that here in a little bit. Now, on the second side, once saved, the end date can only be changed to make it greater than the current end date. So you can extend it and go into the future, but you can never shorten it by going into the past. So you can never make it less than today. So for example, you could change this end date from 6/30 of 2027 if you needed to end it now because the business closed or they're no longer offering services for that fund or some other reason. You can change it to today's date for your end date, and then it's gone. It will change it, it will stop it, it will end it right there. You can turn around, let's say your grant gets extended, your contract with them gets extended, and you want to take it through 12/31 of 2027. You can update that at any time and go forward. But the problem is that once you start getting past the date, today's date, the current date, you can never come back and go less than today. So when you're doing these dates, make sure that you have your information correct, that you're doing the right thing, that you're setting up this date range to reflect exactly what you're doing. That's the reason why a lot of the LWIAs, they choose in some cases to leave that alone and then to create a new fund source line for 07/01/2027 with a new end date for their new contract. Some of them choose to do that rather than extend the end date for the other one. You have, as you will see when we go to one of these other screen captures, you have a whole page of what you can work with. Some of them choose that when that particular contract is over, they just make a new relationship with the new contract dates. It all depends on what makes the most sense to your LWIA and which way you are most comfortable with keeping it organized. We're not going to tell you that there's only one way. There are several ways to do this and still have it all be correct. If the grant is extended, obviously, like we were talking about, the local system administrator can just change the end date to extend the relationship with the entity or location for the selected fund source or sources. In this case, I'm entering a 1Y grant that's not going to start until July 1st of 2025. And even though I'm entering the fund source with a future start date, this part of the relationship won't affect the 1Y client services. Oh, there's a mistake. I need to correct that slide. I am sorry. I have a date range there that did not get updated. And that is creating a relationship. Taking a quick note here so I can correct that afterwards. Date range needs updated. You know, when you're doing these things, you find some things every now and then where you just like, oops, okay, all I can say is I missed it. But anyway, for point of purpose of this discussion, this should be 7/1 of 2025 through 6/30 of 2027 for the date range that only those services are going to be available. Now, when we go back over here, we're going to take a look, and this is just the up top, you know, where we see that this is what we have entered. We've got everything ready. Are we ready to move to the next part of this and select the program activities? In my case, this is all I'm going to have for Timely Business Company. I'm going to have some 1A, some 1D, and in the future, we've got some 1I coming. So I'm going to click Next. From here, the List Programs Activity screen, you should have nothing the first time when you're doing this, when you're creating the relationship. We're going to click Add Program Activities in order to pick which titles from a drop-down, from the choice list that's going to be given to us, to add services to the relationship. And that is going to be generated based on our choices of what fund sources we entered. Now, for those of you who have been around a long time, you're going to recognize registration required core services. You're going to recognize intensive services. IWDS is a legacy system. It's got data that goes all the way back to 1997. Prior to the most current version of WIOA, at that point in time, when I first started in 2010, you had registration required core services, intensive services, and training services. We had 3 different types. Nowadays, all you guys have is career and training, and then we have the disaster recovery services, and they've renamed 1Y multiple times. We've had all kinds of different ways to do the 1Y program name for services, but we have not been able to remove the registration required core services or the intensive services from the screen or from the logic without it breaking the system. We're not sure exactly why. We had some very talented programmers who looked at it, and no one was ever able to figure out how to remove those when everything went to career and training. So I'm just going to ask you guys to give us some grace and just ignore those when you're doing this. So you're going to want to select from career services and training services, disaster recovery, if you need it, youth, if that's what we're doing, but just ignore those other 2 types. Now you're going to check all the different programs you're going to want to add activities for as you're creating this relationship. In this case, I'm picking 1A career, 1A training, 1D career, 1D training, and the youth services. I am not adding any disaster recovery services at this time. You could choose to go back and add them later. When you click Next, this is what comes up. It's going to give you the list of what you've picked and where you're going. Take a look at this, and then we are going to click the save to move on to the next step in the guided application. At this point, it takes us to the first choice, which is my 1A career services, and I get to select from the current list of drop-down what this is. Robert, we looked at all kinds of different things to try to figure out a way to not show which ones were active and which ones were not. And unfortunately, I think it was just the age of the program. That's part of the reason why you'll find there are a number of things in IWDS that we're going to move away from or be able to move from when we come out with IWDS 2.0 here in the next year or so. It's just when you're dealing with an older system that has legacy data and a lot of historical records and things in it, sometimes we don't have the flexibility to make it do exactly what we want. And I have to freely admit that in my last 14 years, I have not used my programming skills to the point where I would say rusty is probably a gracious term to use for some of my programming skills now. I've been on the end user side of things for since I moved to DCEO, and I do have an understanding when the programmers are talking in their language, but the best way to describe it is that the system was just too old to allow for some of the functionalities that we want it to do now in today's modern times. Trust me, I asked if there was a way to just have those items appear hidden or not visible. Some other technical programming tricks that could do it, but then what we ended up with when we tried those tricks was that we ended up with a blank space here, which still had a checkbox, which caused some problems of its own. So unfortunately, we're just dealing with an older system that is aging out of what we can do with it. All right, moving back to the presentation, we are now going to select the items under 1A career planning that we want to offer at this location. I'm selecting activity career planning, job search assistance, referred to employment placement assistance, initial assessment of skill levels, comprehensive and specialized assessment, development of an IEP, workforce preparation skills, federal job referral, tools, and SS tools and equipment, and SS uniforms. And I'm going to take a quick look over it before I click next. We can always come back and make some changes before we hit save. We can always make changes after we save. But I try to make sure that when I'm doing something like this, that I take a second, look away from the screen, and then I look back to make sure that I've done what I thought I did. Then when I click next, it takes us to the training services for 1A. We're going to do the same thing again. We're going to pick our choices. I picked 5 items here, including follow-up services. Then when we click next, it takes us to the 1D career services. And then next after that takes us to 1D training services. And then it takes us to the youth service choices. And it's a longer list, so I split it into 2 parts on this screen. And we would just pick the items we want and then click next. And then we get a summary screen that is going to give us, and I split this up between 2 spots because it was too hard to read on trying to put it together on one. As you can see, the micro type here, I don't know about you, but since I turned 50, though, that's getting a little tiny for me. So this is the summary screen. It's broken up into 2 parts. And this shows the 1A career, the 1D career, the 1A training, the 1D training. These are the items that we chose. If there's something here that we want to go back and change, either add or remove, we click update for that section. Down here at the bottom of that screen, we're going to have the choices that we made for the 1Y. If we're happy with everything, we're going to click next. And at this point, we go in here where it asks us to update the zip codes. Once again, this is a situation where prior to my coming on with DCEO in 2010, this was something that they recommended that you do when creating your relationships. They wanted zip codes in here. They did this with more of the historical data going back to 2004, 2005, 2006. Since 2010, with the way that the programming is working and the way everything is, we do not recommend putting any zip codes in the relationship. It can cause issues that limit the services are available as the zip code table is updated. There can be a disconnect sometimes where it's looking for it, and it may be the right zip code on here and you have the right zip code on the service, but for some reason they're not communicating. And the best thing that we can explain is that our best practices is to tell you, don't put zip codes in. If I'm helping you when you call in with a problem with your relationship, trying to put it on trying to enter a service, and I go into your relationship and I see that there are zip codes selected, I'm going to delete them all. I'm going to remove every single one of them that you have in here, and then I can almost guarantee you suddenly your relationship's going to work on the service. So just don't enter them here. Once again, this is something we tried to see if there was a way in the programming to remove, get rid of this step and move forward without it. We could not find a way to get it to work and have the functionality still work on the guided application. If you have zip codes in your old relationships, yes, you should remove them as you find them. I would not recommend having anything in there. And yeah, I agree with what Rory just posted in the chat, that initially, that's what was explained to me by Jerry Snyder. Those of you who have been around remember that name. Jerry Snyder trained me, and she said the zip codes were used for reporting and for grouping things by report when generating them. But since those days, it's not used that way anymore. They got away from it. They found other ways to do things, and having zip codes in there could be the reason why your services aren't showing up. I would say that if you have zip codes in your relationships, I can almost guarantee you that 99% of the time, if you're having problems trying to get a service to show up when you're entering them, that it's related to the zip code being there. So I would say if you're going through and you're reviewing, and as you're entering new dates or new things, if you see that there's zip codes on your relationships, I definitely recommend removing them. Yep, I agree with what you're saying, Robert. It was more of a requirement back in the day, and it was definitely something that was required. And I know that we were able to. There were several screens, because when I first started out, that was one of the first busy work things Jerry gave me to try to learn the system, was I was supposed to go through and on these different on the different screens for search and data entry, I needed to find certain what fields we needed to remove the requirements from. And that was one of my first major things that I had to do while learning IWDS. So at this point, skip this. We just hit the next button. We don't do anything here. And for those that do not know, down here at the bottom, I did put in that CIP codes are classification of instructional program codes. So CIP is classification of instructional program. So once you click that next button, you get to a relationship summary screen. And this is where, David, if you're looking, you can see right here on the relationship whether or not CIP codes have been selected. And you can just click that update button to go right into it and remove them. From here, you can tell that there are 5 programs and 39 activities selected that are active, that are on this relationship. That doesn't mean that they are the active ones. It just means that that's how many have been selected in the course of things. Under this basic information, if one of these had an end date that's already come up, some of those programs and activities may no longer be active because the end date, the date range of the relationship is no longer valid for that fund source. So the key things to look at here. Make sure you don't have anything in the amounts. Make sure you don't have anything in the CIP code. Make sure your date ranges have something, and then we look right up here. You want to make sure that this status is actually active, otherwise it's not. At this point, thank you, Laura. The CIP codes are going to be collected on the provider management side of the new system versus being in the relationships as it was in the old times. It's one of the things that we definitely wanted to make sure was fixed in the new system, and it will be. So from here, if everything looks the way you want it to look, it's the right OWIA, it's the right company, it's the right location, it's the right date range, it's the right fund sources, everything looks good. At that point, you click activate. And activate turns it on. The only thing that really changes are these things right here. It now says active. And if at any point in time, let's say they go out of business completely and you don't want to go in and, you can always click inactivate if there's a reason that needs to be done. However, in my opinion, I would rather, if you find out that this location's closed or they moved, you're going to want to turn around and just change the end dates of the fund sources and leave this the way it was so that prior items are still connected. So at this point, we're going to go, if you remember our test client from yesterday, Ruth Aaron, we are going to go into Ruth Aaron, our brand new test client that just came in with an application date of 12/2/24. And she's already got some other things in here that we used at a different location for, with the development of the IEP, the career planning, and the initial assessment of skills. So now we're going to actually turn around and add something else, and we're going to be looking at our relationship with Timely Business Company to have them be the choice. So we are going to add an enrolled service. We're going to go into 1A with Ruth Aaron. We're going to pick a training service. So now what we have to make sure of, this is going to be an example of how the provider appears in the service if your service is within the date range for the title and the service selected is in the relationship. So all of those pieces have to be correct in order for the service to show up. So in this client record, we're choosing Title 1A, we're doing a training service, and your start date is 1/2/2025. We're going to select the activity of occupational skills training. We're going to say that it is ITA funded, yes, contract funded, no, and then we're going to click next. So we pick the type, next, fill in those 2 things, next, and now we're on the add required activity information screen for the service. So the grant defaults here. If this is the correct grant, you leave it alone. Otherwise, you can pick something else from your drop-down. It's required to answer the green related yes or no. I've entered a SIP code that goes with what this person is getting occupational skills training for. The SIP description is computer programming, programmer general. I have an ONET code because that's required that it has to be in there. The current status is that the service is open. The weekly hours is 15. It is not a bridge program activity. But at this point, in order to finish this service, I need to pick my provider, and I'm wanting it to be from my relationship. So at this point, you can either search for your relationship name, you can search for your relationship number, or you can just click show all to show all the ones that are available. And in this case, I clicked show all, and it provides all of your providers in alphabetical order, 3 at a time on the page. So what you need to watch for is that if a location has multiple active relationships with the LWIA, you could have multiple results with the same location name, and you need to make sure that you're picking your right relationship ID number when you're picking them. So if it's not on the first page or however, you're going to hit next page. In this case, I go 4 pages to get to the page where Timely Business Company shows up with the relationship that I created that has today's date, 01/07/2025. I'm going to pick the correct provider relationship ID and click the pick button, at which point it fills in that provider because it was in the relationship, it was in the right title, and it was inside the active date range. So if you're trying to do this and you do your search providers and your provider is not showing up as a choice in that service, the first 3 things for you to troubleshoot are whether or not that service was picked in your relationship under your choices under that title and career or training. You want to make sure that your service is in the right title, that this is the title that you have your relationship set up that it's just one of the fund sources. And you want to make sure that you're within the active date range of that service. So we're going to jump back here just for a second. We're going to make sure that it's in the fund source, in the date range, and it's in one of these program activities that we selected back here. Those are the first 3 things to troubleshoot if your service is not showing up at this point in the service when you click your search providers button. Now, every LWIA across the state, all of you, should have at least one local system administrator who has the responsibility of maintaining the provider-entity relationships. Some of you guys have multiple local system administrators who are trained on how to do this, and you work together. I strongly recommend that whoever is doing the relationships, whether it's one person or multiple people, that you have a clear separation of how you are doing to maintain your schedule for updating your relationship end dates. There's no one right way to do it. If some of you want to schedule to review your relationships at the end of your program year, some people like to schedule toward the latter part of June every year because program year runs from July 1 to June 30. And they come in end of June and make sure all their relationships that are scheduled to end within the next 12 months are updated. If the grant's extended, things of that nature, they take the time to do annually, once a year at the end of the program year, to review their relationships. Some people like to do it at the end of the calendar year, scheduling it toward the latter part of December when things slow down. You may not have as much work in the office. You might be one of the only people in the office during that last 2 weeks of December. I like doing my user audits, which all of you should have received last week. I like doing my user audits during that time period because it gives me time to act. I don't have a lot of other distractions going on and I can focus on what I'm doing. So some people like using the end of the calendar year. Some people like to use every 6 months and do it twice a year. And you update review half of your relationships in December and half of them in June, so that if you have a lot of relationships and have a lot of these that are out there that you're going to be maintaining, sometimes it's best to break them up. And if you have a ton of them, I know there's at least one LW out there that likes to do it on a quarterly basis where they're looking at it. In the case of where you may have multiple people who are you may have 2 or 3 people who do the relationships in your LWIA. Usually what happens is that I've heard alphabetically that this person does A through J, K through R, and F through Z as an example. But however you guys want to do it, that's your decision. It's just strongly recommended that at least once a year, somebody is reviewing your relationships. The best way to verify the contact person information is when whoever's contacting you, let me get back to that in a second, Robert. I'm going to finish relationships first, and then I'll pop back on that. So there's no required direction from OET on how to maintain those relationship end dates and ensuring the relationships stay current. And like I said, this is something each local system administrator who's assigned the responsibility of provider entity relationships has to figure out how they want to do it to keep the information up to date. If the LWIA does not maintain their relationships and keep them up to date, you run the risk that those relationships are going to expire, and that's going to restrict your various career planner staff from being able to record services on client records with those service providers. LWIA point of contact for training providers. So I'm going to pop back here real quick and talk about those contacts again that Robert brought up. What I'm going to tell you about contacts is this. When you are creating the entity or the location because the company, the business provider, the service provider has contacted your LWIA, that is the point in time that you want to get the information about the contact person. You want to verify who is the contact person at this location, who's going to be the person that does this, especially if your LWIA is one that wants the training provider to actually enter their own training programs, then that is where this becomes extremely critical, because you're going to tell them, look, I need to know who it is that's going to be entering these training programs. I have to enter them as a contact for the location, and I have to get them their user ID and give them a password for them to be able to log into the public side URL. So now we're going to jump back forward. Hopefully that answered your question. And let me get here, because now it's kind of timely that we're back into here. So now we're at the LWIA point of contact for these training providers. Like I just said, if the person at the location is the one entering the training providers, not the LWIA, this is extremely important. So the LWIA needs to make sure that the contact information on the public side of IWDS is up to date. If the local system administrator who was the main contact person for the LWIA has left and is no longer employed by your organization, or they retired, or they went on to got promoted to something else, or they no longer do the relationships and the entity and contact and other things, this information needs to be kept up to date on IWDS so that when someone gets on here, if they find you through a Google search, or they find this, or they're doing this, when they click new providers, your contact information comes up with the correct person. So in this case, I click new providers. I'm a business. I'm Timely Business Company. I enter the zip code for where my training program is being offered. If my program is being offered in more than one location, then I need to put in the zip code of my headquarters or main location, my entity, rather than my location. And then I'm going to click the Find button. And in this case, I typed in, now keep in mind, this is all information in my test environment. Some of it is close to what's actually real for LWIA 20. I apologize. But 62704 is the zip code here in Springfield, Illinois. And it brings up, because I'm inside LWIA 20, it brings up Land of Lincoln Workforce Alliance, which even in my test environment is listed as the LWIA for LWIA 20. There's the address, the contact information, and then down here it says for more information, contact, and this is the part that's important. I filled in for test purposes that the contact's name is John Doe. I used my old state telephone number, and I made up a email address for John Doe. And this is what a brand new company or an existing company that looks on this public side login page is going to find when they're looking for your LWIA, and they type in a zip code that's inside your LWIA. So you can test this yourself by going to this page from the URL that was provided, click New Providers, type in the zip code, a zip code that's active in your LWIA, and see what comes up. And if this information is not correct, whether it's this information here for where your local workforce investment board is, or who the contact person is, then you need to get a hold of the performance measure staff, which is Paula Berry or Mark Burgess, and you need to let them, and you CC the IWDS system administrators, which are Chris Tylen and Jim Potts, and let us know that this information needs to be updated in IWDS. And Laura Dom put in the chat that the new ETPL policy letter, when issued, is going to include an attachment listing the local ETPL coordinators. And that's going to be used to populate the contact information in the new system in IWDS 2.0. It's also now contained in LWACS. So hopefully that kind of explains a little bit of the direction we're going with it. But, you know, it can't hurt after today's training if you guys want to go out and look at this and just make sure that the information is current today, that you didn't have somebody retire or leave that you need to replace their information. And if that does need done, make sure that you send an email, as we said, to the performance measure staff and CC the IWDS system administrators. That information will be at the end of the PowerPoint with the contact information and email addresses if you don't already have it. So at this point, here are those contact information pieces. Jim Potts, Chris Tylen, we're the IWDS system administrators. I jokingly refer to us as the nut and the bolt. He has a much stronger understanding of eligibility and other things than I do, and I do very well with the technical aspect of how something works, while he is very good at the why something works. So we complement each other very well. Performance measure staff has Mark Burgess, Paula Berry, and a new addition, Ray Al-Amin. Yes, Paul, if you have more than, updating the zip codes, if you have more than one, like you test multiple zip codes to see how it comes up in your LWIA, and if you find one that's wrong, you go to Paula Berry with Mark Burgess, CCing Jim Potts and Chris Tylen, so we make sure that everything is taken care of. But Paula usually is the one that handles these, unless she's on vacation or on a major project. And for those of you that aren't looking at the chat, there was a question regarding LWIA, LWIB staff contacts, and Laura said that the LWACS system is going to be used to populate the new system and the attachment. So hopefully that takes care of any and all questions. If anyone has any additional ones before we go anywhere, this is the time to ask them. I do not do anything with training programs themselves. That is the WIOA performance measure staff. So any questions you guys actually have about training programs themselves goes to Paula. And with that, I want to thank you for spending your Tuesday afternoon with me and getting an hour and a half of information about entities, locations, and relationships. Contacts are extremely important, in my opinion. Hopefully you guys learned something today and it clarified some things that you may not have had a clear grasp of prior to this, and I hope I made it understandable for everyone. The PowerPoint is going to be available. It should have been made available at the very top of the chat. We're going to send out a copy of it via email to everyone that registered and attended. And this training webinar will be available online, so that if you guys do need to refer back to it, or if you hire a new local system administrator that's going to be working with relationships, entities, and locations, you will have the ability for them to watch this webinar. And with that, I am going to end the training class, and hopefully everyone had at least not a boring time. Thank you very much.